I love it. Oh man, I hope that you're ready for this overflow because on Friday morning I opened up my laptop to begin writing the message for tonight. And I'm here to tell you there was a blank white page staring at me. And God filled up 15 pages of notes over the past weekend. And I cut it down to 7 tonight. And someone said, thank God, right? Because we don't want to be here all night. But I just believe so much in what we're about to talk about and what we're about to explore together. If this has been your first week in the past couple of weeks, we started a series last week called Good Work, Eternal Purpose, looking at the life of Nehemiah, looking at what God says to be true about work. What does he have for us in the hidden things? College students in the room, why are you supposed to do homework? Why are you supposed to study for tests? Why are you supposed to do, somebody said boo. Why shouldn't you use Quizlet? Nobody in this room uses Quizlet. And everybody, don't lie in church. But I just believe that God has so much purpose in work. He made us to create with him. He doesn't just love us enough to save us, he loves us enough to empower us, to be co-creators in the world that he made. And that's why I just believe so strongly exploring this topic is so important. If you have a copy of your scriptures, if you have the Bible with you, I'd love for you to grab it and turn to Psalm 139. And hold on. I was getting there. Jonathan just called me out. If you have your Bible, hold it up in the air. We've been doing this. This is so good. I want you to know this. If you don't have a Bible, that changes tonight. We would love to give you one for free. No questions asked. You can have one at home. That's fine too. I would love nothing more than to give you a Bible. Psalm 139. Thank you, Jonathan. That was good. I needed that. I was going to wait and do it later when we got into Nehemiah, but we're just going to go ahead and do it now. Psalm 139, we anchored a lot of the message last week in this section of the text, and I felt like God say this weekend that we're not done in Psalm 139. That we've got to start here again this week, but we're going to start in verse 1 as opposed to verse 13 from last week. So Psalm 139, David writes in verse 1, he says, "O Lord, you have examined my heart, and you know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up, you know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of what? Of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand." I love this next part. "I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence." I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. And I don't know where you are tonight. And if you're watching online, I don't know even where you're watching from right now. But here's what I know. We all need to be reminded that we cannot escape God's good spirit and we cannot get away from God's presence because he chose to give it to us. And that's all that matters. That will drastically and completely change everything that you believe about everything, including work and including eternity. And this, for me, I feel like I began to learn how to live out the truth and to believe Psalm 139, very ironically, standing right where I am right now. When I was 14 years old, I walked through the back door of this auditorium, and I was blown away, much like Jake just mentioned, during the time of hosting. And I looked around and looked at all the lights and looked at all the people and looked at how people loved each other. And I was like, whoa, this is very different. And I want to be a part of this. And I came down front and I met Mike and asked how to get involved and ended up getting on the production team. I ran one of the cameras back in the back of the room for a couple years. And I started volunteering. And I was like, wow, I feel like this is a place that I truly do belong. Like I believe what's on that wall right there, that I belonged here. And I went home one day, I'll never forget this, and I printed out a picture of the building that I found on Google Images. And I wrote on it, "I will work here one day." And I hung it up on my wall, and every single day, I got up and I saw that picture. And as I was volunteering, I was trying to convince them to give me a job, and they said no, and they said no, and they said no, right? We're like, Andrew, raise your hand right now. Say hey to Andrew. Say it right now. Just say, "Hey, Andrew." Like right where Andrew was is where I applied for my first job here. I went to my volunteer direct report, and I handed him my resume. And I was like 15 years old at the time. And he looked at me and was like, "Dude, you're 15. What's on your resume?" I was like, "Plenty of stuff, my guy. I'm ready to go." And he was like, "Carson, you're too young to work here full time." I was like, "My mom can bring me." And he was like, "No, chill, dude. You're being weird." And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to prove it." So what I ended up doing, and this is, I don't say this about me. I promise, like this will make sense in a minute. I devoted myself to the hidden work. It was all I knew how to do. So there's a little janitor's closet right out there in the hallway, and I found it one day. And I talked somebody into giving me a key to it. And I went in and I got the mop bucket. And every single Wednesday night after our band rehearsal for the Sunday, I would come in here and I would mop this stage. I mopped it over and over and over again. And with every stroke of the broom, I wondered, is somebody gonna notice me? Is somebody gonna notice my hard work? Is somebody gonna notice what I'm doing in the hidden place? Is this all for nothing? Does it have any purpose? And I would just go from corner to corner to corner. And then I figured out some other things that I could do. I found a duster, and I would walk around and I would dust things. And I was horrible at it. I was so bad at mopping the stage. I ruined carpet in the hallway one day because I was so excited. I knocked over the entire mop bucket into the hallway, and we had to get fans and dry everything up. I knocked over a rack full of bolts and screws in that room over there. I was horrible. But I knew that God needed to teach me something in that place. But here's what's true, is I wanted immediate results. When I started working, I wanted immediate results for my effort. I also wanted the perfect opportunity. And I felt like if it didn't come today, then God had failed me. Then God hadn't come through on his promise. And I wanted the road to be easy. I just wanted to ascend into the position that I had once dreamed of being in. And for a long period of time, I would just sit here and I would mop and I would say, "God, what do you have for me? Is this worth it?" And that's where I believe I learned how to begin to understand that God has never left me behind and that he has purpose in all of the hidden things and all of the difficult things. But what I had to learn is that God had to do some work on me before I could really begin doing other things for God. That I could have all of the ambitions in the world and all of the desires in the world and all of these, like this innate kind of thing inside of me to make a difference in the world. But I had to learn how to be with God first. And the truth in the matter is, we all, when we think about work, we're not that much different. We want immediate results. When you get to college, you're like, "I just want to be out of here. I want to get good grades. I want to get a good degree, and I want to excel in life." Maybe some of you are like, "I'm just staying here for the next 6 years," and that's great too. But like, you get the point. You're like, you're ready to go. And you want a perfect job when you get out of school. And if you were all just being really honest, this is probably true for the majority of us, we all want it to be easy. So what do we do when the good work that we talked about last week becomes hard work? Do we give up? Do we surrender our purpose? Do we just believe that God doesn't care and that God doesn't see where we are in our life right now? And what I'm begging you, and I hope that this series communicates to you, is it's gonna take some hard work. That's the title of the message tonight. The hard work, the difficult work, the hidden work, the seemingly meaningless work. God uses every single bit of it. We talked about this last week. We'll put it on the screen in case you didn't get to write it down. This is what God's view of our work is. It's for us to create beautiful, extraordinary, and meaningful things that glorify God and help others experience Eden. And that word at the very end is so intentional. It comes from the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 1, the Hebrew word for delight. Help other people experience God-given delight. That is what we are called to. That is God's view of how we are to contribute in the world in which we live. And we looked at the life of Nehemiah, and if you can remember all of the details that led us up to where we were last week, Nehemiah was a cupbearer in King Artaxerxes' palace. And he went to him one day and he talked to him about the dysfunction of what the people of Israel were experiencing in Jerusalem, where they had returned from exile. And he began a 900-mile journey from Susa to Jerusalem. And he gets there and he goes out late one night and he inspects the wall that was in disarray around the city of Jerusalem that was leaving the people of Israel very susceptible to attack and to harm. And he decides that he's going to rebuild this wall. And he goes in, and this is exactly where we left off last week, Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 18. If you want to turn there, we're going to spend the rest of our time tonight in the book of Nehemiah. In Nehemiah 2, verse 18, this is what we read. He says, "Then I told them," talking about the city council and the city leaders and the church leaders, "about how the gracious hand of God had been on me, and about my conversation with the king, King Artaxerxes. And they replied at once, 'Yes, let's rebuild the wall.' So they began the good work." They began the good work that God had set out for Nehemiah to do. And I think that this, if you look back at what we talked about last week, if you are looking to find your purpose in this life, why are you here? Why are you in Wilmington? Why are you at UNCW or at Cape Fear or Brunswick Community College? Why do you work where you work? How do you find purpose where your feet reside? I think if you look at the life of Nehemiah leading up to this point, he embraced 4 things that delivered him to his purpose. 1, he embraced his gifting. God had gifted him with a leadership capacity. And I think that the question, when you think about what is your gifting, you automatically think, well, what's going to get me ahead in life? Well, remember and know that the purpose of a gift from God is to then give it back away. What gift have you been given that God is calling you to give away to others? Your gifting, Overflow, is not about you. It is about what God wants to do in and through you. The second thing he embraced is his context. He embraced where he was in the king's palace. He embraced the opportunity that was right in front of him. Where are you right now? What opportunities are in front of you right now? There are probably more opportunities in front of you than you are willing to admit. He embraced his ambition. That was to help the people of God return from exile and to be the people that God had made them to be. For you, what lights you up? What brings you to life? You must consider that in order to find your God-given purpose. And the 4th thing that he embraced was a burden. The question that I have for you is, what keeps you up at night? And I'm not talking about the anxiety that keeps you up at night. I'm talking about what breaks your heart in the way that it keeps you up at night. When you begin to consider that, and you embrace a God-given burden, you will find a God-given purpose. And by the way, when God gives you a purpose, he will supply everything that you need to fulfill that purpose. God gives you everything that you need to do all that he is calling you to do. And that all sounds really, really good. But what happens when the good work becomes hard work? And that's what happens in verse 19. The word "but" appears. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab heard of our plan, Nehemiah writes, they scoffed contemptuously. "What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" they asked. And we could just read past this as just something that Nehemiah wrote down, but I want us to look at it in detail really quick. Notice the question, what are you doing and are you rebelling against the king? Notice that that's a doubt and an accusation. And the truth of the matter is this is how the enemy is going to try to defeat you when it comes to the good work that God has given you. He's going to try to make you doubt yourself, and then he's going to lay in a subtle but clear accusation of you to make you question why you are doing what you're doing, to try to distract you away from what God has called you to do. The enemy doesn't have to lie to you when he can get you to lie to yourself. And it's always easiest to believe a lie when the most is at stake. And Nehemiah, I believe, is presented with an opportunity like no other in this moment. Going, do I believe what he is saying? Do I take the bait? Because doubting your contribution ensures that you don't get to contribute fully. Doubting whether or not you have a gift and you have something to contribute to the world that you live in, only guarantees that you don't walk in the calling to the fullest extent that God has for you. And bowing to the accusations of others or of your inner critic is you idolizing someone else's voice or your own voice above God's voice. Insecurity overflow, I'm just gonna push a little bit for a second. Insecurity, I struggle with it chronically. Insecurity is us idolizing our own inner voice over God's voice in our life. What if that was the way that you saw your insecurity that you struggle with? As an opportunity to choose to listen to God's voice above every voice, including your own. And I love the way that this continues on. Notice what Nehemiah says. I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall. But you have no share, legal right, or historic claim in Jerusalem. In other words, I am called by God to do what I'm doing, and I'm going to believe that God reserves the right to own everything that I'm about to do and to supply everything that I need. The degree of difficulty that you face in living out your purpose is irrelevant when the God of heaven is standing behind you and in front of you and beside you. Remember the words of David. He's saying, God's presence has never left me. Nehemiah knew that. God will empower you to endure any bit of hardship that you begin to experience in this life to get to your God-given purpose. And when you begin to look at chapter 3, you'll notice that it is a list of names and sections of the project of rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. And you'll find if you read it, and we don't have time to do this tonight, but you'll find if you read it that the phrase next to, or the word next, is used 16 times in the chapter. And there are 38 individuals and 42 people groups articulated just in chapter 3. What does that tell us? Is that work is incredibly personal to God. Nehemiah wrote down every single one of their names and where they were from and what it is that they were working on. They could have felt like me up here with a mop. And Nehemiah's like, no, I am taking note of the work that they are doing. It's God-centered community that is going to empower you to endure the opposition that you will inevitably face. That's why we take community and family so seriously around here, because we believe directly and very, very powerfully that God has given us something to contribute, and we cannot contribute it by ourselves. You can't do good work alone. You need people around you. The small things matter. Personal contribution is important to God, and how we steward the small and seemingly insignificant work is known by God. And when God is looking for someone to do good work for his purposes and his kingdom, I believe that when you look at the text of Nehemiah and you look at the life of Nehemiah, you will see that he is looking for hope-filled, faithful, passionate, drama-free, and hard-working people. That's what he's looking for. But we want what we want on our terms. We want progress immediately. We want the perfect opportunity, and we want it to be easy. But when you look at what happened in chapter 3 alone, it was not easy, but they endured together. God is not picky about who he calls, but he is specific about what they do and how they live their life. Nehemiah saw the work of God through God's lens, God's view of the fact that work is personal, and he is attentive to the details and to the small things. For those of you that are in school right now and you stay up late at night working on homework, God sees you in that moment, and he will honor your faith. And when we jump all the way through chapter 3 to the beginning of chapter 4, we're going to spend a good amount of our time in chapter 4 tonight. It says in verse 1, Sanballat was very angry when he learned that they were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage, and he mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think that they are doing? Do they think that they can build the wall in a single day by just offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think that they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap and charred ones at that? If you have your Bible, underline rubbish heap. We're going to come back to that in a minute. It is incredibly important. He articulates this idea that it looks like a rubbish heap or rubble. But Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, he chimes in and says, that stone wall that everybody in chapter 3 just worked so hard on would collapse if even a fox walked on the top of it. And then I prayed, Nehemiah writes. Remember from last week, Nehemiah, there are 14 prayers recorded in 13 chapters of Nehemiah. He says, then I prayed, hear us, God, for we are being mocked. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads. He's not parsing any words. And may themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger in front of the builders. But notice, Nehemiah is ticked and he is frustrated. But who did he take it to? He took it to God. Michael pointed up. He took it directly to his heavenly Father. When you're mad with the assignments that you're given, when you're mad or frustrated at work, who do you go to? Do you run to God first? Does God get the brunt of your frustration or your angst or your aggravation? If you're anything like me, probably not. You go to somebody that will affirm you, that'll make you feel better about why you're mad or justified in your anger. And oftentimes we go into an echo chamber when we are the most frustrated. But that is the least helpful option. And Nehemiah says, I'm going to God. But the truth is, we must, as a generation, I'm begging us to really take a look at how we process tension and anger. Because unprocessed tension, it results in resentment, cynicism, fear-mongering, and insecurity. And respectfully, I have 2 words for that. Stop it. We cannot be a generation that is cynical, that is pessimistic, that makes people feel afraid to live out their good work and their eternal purpose, that makes people feel insecure because we feel insecure. We must take our tension and our frustration to God. And if we're all being really honest, jealousy and insecurity make us secretly root for other people's failure. And that is idolizing our own success and tearing people down in the process. Dishonoring people never honors God. Look at the life of Jesus. As frustrated as people were with him to the point that they killed him, he never dishonored them. In fact, he asked God to forgive them. In verse 6, he says, at last, the wall was complete to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. And I think that the truth and the reality is we need more enthusiasm as a generation when it comes to work. Because God has created us to create. He created us on purpose, for his purpose. That should mean that we have great enthusiasm. If Jesus followers don't see the potential in work, then who will? If Jesus followers don't set the pace for enthusiasm and redemption, then how are we going to be people that fan the flame of revival? I read this article the other day, and the headline was, "The church is dying." What? They just haven't been to overflow. The church is not dying, but the church is at a crossroads. We as a generation must stand up and lead the way in enthusiastically following the good work that God has given us because it has eternal purpose. Overflow. The work that you have been assigned impacts eternity. Don't miss it because you're listening to the inner critic inside or the people that are making you doubt yourself. And in turn, in reality, all of that is just rooted in their own insecurity. But we believe that like it's ultimate truth. I'm running out of time. But in verse 7, it says, but when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, big words, heard that the work was going ahead and that the gaps in the wall of Jerusalem were being repaired, they were furious. They all made plans to come and fight Jerusalem and throw us into confusion. But we prayed. Whoa. We didn't argue with them. We prayed to our God, and we guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. When people don't approve of you, your only job is to stay faithful. When people don't appreciate you for the work that you do, your job is to stay faithful. If you live for the approval of humans, you will die trying to get it. If you live for the approval of God, His grace will deliver it every single time. When people don't treat you right, you honor in return, you work hard, and you make proactive moves. Because here's the reality. People are incapable of seeing fully what God sees clearly. God sees your purpose clearly, and not everybody is going to see that. In fact, it's going to make some people furious to where they launch all sorts of doubts and accusations at you. Your job is to remain faithful. The thing that I live my life by is when people disapprove of me, I know that it's time to pray. Every time that someone disapproves of you, the work that you do, the grade that you got, it's time to pray. Every single time, without exception. In verse 10, then the people of Judah began to complain. The workers are getting tired, and there is so much rubble or rubbish to be moved. We will never be able to build the wall by ourselves. So check this out. They went from being enthusiastic workers that were working together in unity on the project, getting it done, to people that are then identifying the project in the same way as their critics were identifying it. The first person to articulate the progress of the wall being rebuilt as rubbish or rubble was Sanballat, the critic. The person trying to distract them away from the work that God has given them. The thing we need to know in this is that language is contagious. Be careful with what you adopt. And oftentimes, what we see as rubble, God sees as potential. What we see as things that are in disarray and that can never be anything worthwhile, God sees it and says, I can make something out of that. I can redeem that. Nehemiah goes on, meanwhile, our enemies were saying, before they know what's happening, we will swoop down on them and we will kill them and end their work. The Jews who lived near the enemy came and told us again and again, they will come from all directions and attack us. So I placed, Nehemiah speaking, armed guards behind the lowest parts of the wall and the exposed areas, and I stationed the people to stand guard by families armed with swords, spears, and bows. And then the rest of chapter 4 lands in this idea that all the laborers were working with one hand and holding a sword in the other. What Nehemiah knew is that limitations and setbacks have the power either to develop you or to destroy you. When the work gets hard, you can decide, is this going to develop me and grow me, or is this going to destroy me? And Nehemiah chose for it to be a place of development for him and the people who were working on the wall. And a lot of times when we have people attacking us, we excuse ourselves from our calling and our purpose. We spend so much time avoiding difficulty that we miss the best opportunities to grow. And some of you have given up on your calling already and you're in your 20s. You have excused yourself from the table and said, God, I can't do it. And you'll thank me for this later. You're not excused. Sit back down and pursue the good work that God has for you, no matter what it costs. Because someone, somewhere, is counting on you to live out your God-given purpose with integrity and passion and enthusiasm and determination and a refusal to quit. And I love what happens next as you look at chapter 5, and I'm going to summarize the majority of chapter 5 as well. The heading of it is Nehemiah defends the oppressed, because taxes were skyrocketing and the cost of living was skyrocketing, and Nehemiah becomes governor and he enters in and he begins to call people out for raising the interest rates. Sound familiar? And all these things that were happening in that little culture. He was like, enough is enough. We have got to treat each other better than this. And he makes them return their money that they had cheated people out of, and all of these things he does. And when you get into verse 15, he points out that the previous administrations in his role had leveraged their role to hurt other people for their gain. He says the former governors, in contrast, had laid heavy burdens on the people, demanding a daily ration of food and wine, besides 40 pieces of silver. Even their assistants took advantage of the people. But because I feared or I honored God, I did not act that way. I love this. Nehemiah knew what God was calling him to do, and he knew that he could not act as other people had acted before because God was calling him to serve people, to lead people, to being prosperous people. And I love when you think about this, I think that there are three things. He had integrity, he made sacrifices, and he advocated for people. And for all my Jesus followers in the room, we're gonna put a slide on the screen. I would encourage you to take a picture of it. And there are three identity statements that will help you live out good and true integrity, to sacrifice for other people, and to advocate for people. When it comes to integrity, as a follower of Jesus, I guard my heart and integrity by welcoming accountability and aligning my life with God's truth. When it comes to sacrificing selfish success, as a follower of Jesus, I refuse to gain wealth or any form of success that comes at the detriment of other people. And finally, when it comes to being an advocate of people, as a follower of Jesus, I advocate for others by leveraging what I have been entrusted with to serve and to lead them to Jesus. This is us, Jesus followers in the room. We must value our integrity. We must sacrifice opportunities to get ahead at the detriment of other people. When you're presented with an opportunity at work one day to get ahead on the backs of somebody else, you must resist that because you are a follower of Jesus and you must always advocate for other people. In verse 19, Nehemiah says, "Remember, oh my God, all that I have done for these people and bless me for it." Notice, Nehemiah entrusted his work and his effort and his fear and his sweat and his toil to God and to God alone. He trusted that what God was going to do was better and bigger than he could see, and he was okay with that. And then in verse 6, or chapter 6, the heading is continued opposition to rebuilding. And it says, Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished the rebuilding of the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not set up the doors and the gates. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But I realized that they were plotting to harm me. So I replied by sending this message to them: I am engaged in a great work, so I can't come. Why should I stop working to come meet with you? Nehemiah had boundaries. Nehemiah knew what to say no to because he was engaged in a great work. He was focused. But it says in verse 4 times they sent the same message, and each time I gave the same reply. The fifth time, Sanballat's servant came with an open letter in his hand, and this is what it said: there is a rumor circling around the nations, and Geshem tells me that it's true, that you and the Jews are planning to rebel, and that is why you are building the wall. Notice this accusation that's coming in Nehemiah. According to his reports, you plan to be their king. He also reports that you have appointed prophets in Jerusalem to proclaim about you. Look, there's a king in Judah. You can be very sure that this report will get back to the king. So I suggest that you come and talk it over with me. Notice what Nehemiah says. I replied, there is no truth in any part of your story. You're making up the whole thing. They were just trying to intimidate us, imagining that they could discourage us and stop the work. So I continued the work with even greater determination. I love Nehemiah. When they bring all these accusations and they try to make him doubt, they question his effectiveness, they question what he's doing. They even say that there are rumors circling around and that King Artaxerxes is gonna drop the hammer on him. Nehemiah's like, no. I continue forward with greater determination. Why? Because God has called me to this work. But here's the truth. God-given determination is hard because we love to operate on our own strength because we want the credit. We want the credit for the good work that we do. We want everybody to see all the good things that we do. We want people to know that we're successful and that we've got status and that we've got wealth and we've got all of these things because then that will make us feel better about ourselves. But if you are in something for the credit, your impact will soon be forgotten and you will burn out of the good work when it gets hard because you are relying on your own strength. Remember what happened to Adam and Eve in the garden. They relied on their own understanding. They made a mistake, which removed them from the garden and changed work forever. In verses 10 through 14, it kind of talks about how Nehemiah was still incredibly focused no matter what they would say to him. And then in verse 15, it says, so on October 2nd, yesterday, the wall was finished just 52 days after we had begun. In 52 days, they took what Sanballat described as rubbish, and they built the wall to protect the people of Jerusalem. When our enemies in the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated. See, they realized that the work had been done with the help of our God. God got the credit. It was a witness to the nations surrounding them that God is real and that God is powerful. And the truth is that when God helps you in what you are doing, it means that you are touching eternity. It means that you are living out your eternal purpose. And when the work gets hard, you've got to remember that it has not lost its eternal purpose. Every time Nehemiah found a new layer of difficulty, he had more enthusiasm, he chose endurance, and he chose determination. And I think the way that he did this is through 7 things, if you were to look back through. And for us, I think we need to apply these 7 things directly when the work gets hard. Number 1 is we must remember when the work gets hard that work is personal to God. God sees you right where you are in what you are doing and why you are doing it. Number 2, we must embrace difficulty as an opportunity to grow our faith. Number 3, we must entrust our work to God alone. Nehemiah said, remember me, God, for how I have done these things. And number 4, we must guard our heart and our integrity tenaciously. Number 5, we must ruthlessly resist distraction. No matter what they threw at Nehemiah, he said no because he was following the one who had given him the good work that had eternal purpose. Number 6, we must constantly look for the eternal purpose that is sitting right in front of us. Students on campus, you have eternal purpose passing you by every single day down the hallway or down Chancellor's. People that are desperate to know God. People that are desperate to have some relief from the pain that they are carrying. And number 7, we must give God the credit. Because giving God the credit reminds us of the God that we serve. And I think it's so easy for us to miss, to forget how good and how powerful and how worthy God truly is. And when you look at John chapter 14, you see one of the most famous statements in all of Christianity that comes from Jesus in verse 6, where Jesus tells his disciples, specifically Thomas in this moment, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through me. If you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him, and you have seen him. I love this because what comes next? Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. That's such an interesting word that he used there. Because when you go all the way back to the beginning of the story of the Bible in Genesis, Adam and Eve were looking for their appetite to get satisfied by the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We as humans are crazy about satisfaction. We are always looking for the next thing to satisfy us. A job that will satisfy us, a financial portfolio that will satisfy us. We're always looking to feel filled up. But what Jesus goes on to say is that, Philip, you have met the very person that will satisfy everything and anything that you feel like you need on planet Earth. And then in verse 12, he says, I tell you the truth. Anyone who believes in me will do the same works that I have done, and even greater works. Because I'm going to be with the Father. You can ask for anything in my name, and I will do it. You can ask for anything in my name, and I will do it. On the heels of saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way to be fully fulfilled is by being in proximity to me. It says it right there. And I think for all of us, Whether we've been walking with Jesus for a really long time or we just started recently, the truth is that your next step in finding the good work with eternal purpose that God has for you is learning how to allow Jesus to be completely enough, to take him at his word, that he has great work for you to do by the power of his name. And if you've never decided to follow Jesus, the thing I just want to encourage you with is that when you do decide to follow Jesus, and I hope that you do, your whole life begins to change, one moment at a time, as you receive your calling by God to be a co-creator with him, and also get access to all of God's provision and all of God's resources to empower you to live a life worth living. Why? Because Jesus is the way. Jesus is better than any job that we can land. His approval is better than any test grade will make us feel. He is the definition of what it means to be fully fulfilled and to feel contentment on every level. If you would, just stand with me for a few moments as we begin to close our time together tonight. We'd love it if you could just bow your head and close your eyes for a moment. If you've never accepted Jesus, if you've never just said, I want to be a follower of Jesus, you're on my heart tonight. Because following Jesus changes everything. It changes the way that you see every person that you're standing beside. It changes the way that you see the degree you're pursuing or the job that you find. It changes the way that you see yourself. It changes quite literally everything. And I just want to provide an opportunity really quick in this moment. If you've never decided to follow Jesus in the quiet of your own heart, I would just love to give you the opportunity to say, yes, Jesus, I would like to follow you. Just in the quiet of your own heart. You don't have to tell a soul. You don't have to raise your hand in this moment. Just right here, right now, where you are. Just bring it to your mind. Jesus, I want to know more. I want to follow the power of your name. Just say that in the quiet of your own heart. If you've been following Jesus for any length of time, I love it if you can just in the quiet of your own heart and mind just say, Jesus, I trust you to fulfill every desire that I have. And then add a layer to it, that I trust you, Jesus, to help me endure when the hard work comes. Just echo that in your heart for a moment. God, thank you for hearing every single person at the same time. God, thank you for the power of your name and the story of Jesus. God, I thank you for any person who just said in the quiet of their own heart that they want to follow you. I pray that they would make that decision real tonight. I pray that they would tell somebody that they're sitting near or come down and tell us because, God, we love them. God, I pray that they would feel your love tonight. I pray for every Jesus follower in this place that they would know that there is no source that will satisfy them like you and that there is no power greater than your power. God, we thank you for being so holy and so good and so set apart. God, we want to be a generation that fans the flame of revival. And I pray that that would start with us tonight. In Jesus' name.